What's the only thing in the universe worse than a Skrull? No, not two Skrulls, although that's pretty bad too. We're talking about the insidious villain known as Super Skrull. The Kree-Skrull War is an iconic comic book event, which we're finally going to get to see on the big screen thanks to Captain Marvel. Could we learn that Super Skrull is skulking around the MCU? Well, let's find out. The Kree-Skrull War is one of those epic comic book events we've been waiting for ages to play out on the big screen. The good news is that the movie Captain Marvel is finally going to introduce both the Kree and Skrull civilizations to the MCU. The bad news is that now we have to treat all of our beloved MCU characters with suspicion because they might secretly be an evil Skrull. It's a classic case of be careful what you wish for. If you haven't read the comic books, you might be wondering what a Skrull is exactly and why everyone's so excited to see them in the MCU. The Skrull are an alien race of villainous shapeshifters who specialize in subterfuge. These guys are all about the long con, and they'll masquerade as another character for years if they have to in order to fulfill their purpose. Like all other bad guys, they're usually looking for vital information, finding ways to manipulate people, and generally trying to get into an advantageous position for world domination. You know, typical supervillain stuff. Distrust and betrayal can be just as powerful as an actual weapon, so the Skrulls definitely aren't a threat you want to underestimate. Back when he was working on the very first Guardians of the Galaxy movie, director James Gunn actually wanted to include a Skrull. This would have been the species' debut in the MCU, but it wasn't meant to be. Now it's finally time to find out that the Skrulls are out there, possibly pretending to be someone you love. So the big reveal hurts even more. Not that we're giving everyone in the MCU a suspicious side-eye just in case or anything, but we're not just here to talk about the Skrulls. We're going to be talking about Super Skrull, the villain with not one, but two confusing names. You see, in Marvel Comics, there are your average run-of-the-mill Skrulls who are out to cause mayhem and destruction. Then you got your Super Skrulls, who are Skrulls with better-than-average powers. They usually gain powers based on superheroes, like Thor Skrull, who has his own version of Mjolnir. These Super Skrulls aren't to be confused with the character Super Skrull, whose real name is Kl'rt. Listen, these Super Skrulls might not be super creative when it comes to names, but trust us, they're scary. Kl'rt was a member of the elite Skrull army, and for a time, things were going pretty well for him. He landed a wealthy wife and had 2 children, one of whom he actually liked. Most kids are sad when their father goes off to war, but for Smaug and Jacinda, it was probably a good thing. It turns out that Kl'rt wasn't any better as a soldier than he was as a father. In fact, he was defeated so many times his own wife told him to get lost. It's like Pat Benatar once said, "Love is a battlefield." And Kl'rt was defeated once more. Kl'rt was mostly upset he couldn't hang around with his son Smaug, but not his daughter, who he, again, couldn't care less about. However, Jacinda was desperate to win her father's approval, which is something that doesn't typically go too well for Marvel characters. She joins the Skrull army and goes on a mission to recover a gem from the Kree Empire. Jacinda does manage to get a hold of it, but when confronted by the Kree, she does the mature, rational thing and swallows it whole. If the gem is removed, Jacinda will die, meaning she can never finish her mission, and so she goes into hiding. Needless to say, this doesn't endear her anymore to her father, who transitions from simply hating his daughter to wanting to destroy her. Kl'rt then goes from super bad father to Super Skrull under the rule of Emperor Dorek VII. He's granted the powers of the Fantastic Four and sent to Earth to conquer it. This doesn't work out, and Super Skrull adds the Fantastic Four to his growing list of enemies. Finally, Disney has acquired characters like the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, meaning they could show up in the MCU at any time. It might even help to have a character with ties to the Fantastic Four make an appearance before they make their grand entrance. And if you're wondering where he would get his powers from based on the current MCU lineup, that's a fair point. But allow us to present you with Exhibit A, the movie Venom. We all thought it was impossible to have a movie about Venom without Spider-Man, or okay, at least a decent movie about Venom, but it apparently can be done, and it turns out most people don't question the superpower origins of alien creatures that thoroughly. Of course, Super Skrull ends up taking part in the Kree-Skrull War, where he even masquerades as Carol Danvers and runs afoul of the Avengers. We love wondering what comic book characters are going to show up in the MCU and thinking up ways they could be incorporated into the existing storylines. It pretty much makes talking about the Skrulls feel like cheating, since they can look like absolutely anyone and could have appeared at any point in the history of the MCU without us noticing. Will Super Skrull show up in the MCU? Frankly, it seems Pretty likely, now that the Skrull are officially going to be a thing. He's powerful enough to pose a serious threat, and he has a history with many of the current and incoming MCU characters. Also, despite the fact that he hates his daughter, we think Jacinda is a pretty awesome character herself. She eventually becomes a bounty hunter and travels around with She-Hulk going on adventures. We might have to retract our earlier statement that 2 Skrulls is worse than 1 Skrull when we consider cases where one of them is actually a hero that we love. So when could Super Skrull show up? That's a bit of a trickier question. Right now, the 2 obvious points of entry into the MCU would be either Captain Marvel or Avengers Endgame. Of those 2 movies, Captain Marvel is slated to come out first, and will of course deal with the Kree-Skrull war directly. We know actor Ben Mendelsohn has been cast as the Skrull Talos, who goes undercover as Nick Fury's boss. There's just one problem with this that comic book fans probably picked up on right away. Unlike all the other members of his species, Talos can't shapeshift in the comic books. He was born with a defect that makes shapeshifting impossible, but he makes up for it by being really evil. It's not uncommon for Marvel Studios to change comic book characters when they bring them into the MCU. For instance, in Black Panther, Nakia is T'Challa's ex, who broke up with him prior to the start of the movie. But in the comic books, Nakia is scarily obsessed with T'Challa, who has no interest in her whatsoever. There are tons of Skrulls and Super Skrulls to choose from, so why make the leader of the Skrull invasion in Captain Marvel the only one of them who can't shapeshift? We're guessing it has something to do with the fact that Talos is easier to pronounce than most of the Skrull names in the comic books. We couldn't quite blame Marvel for not knowing how to market clerk merchandise. It's possible the movie version of Talos will be more inspired by Super Skrull than the comic book Talos. After all, in the comics, Talos is pretty much known for failing to shapeshift and failing his mission during the war. He even later resorts to outsourcing a job to Howard the Duck. Yeah, not exactly the kind of guy who's going to strike fear into the hearts of a movie audience, but hey, at least people will be able to pronounce his name. It makes way more sense to include Super Skrull, who can shapeshift, has a long history with current MCU heroes, and connections to the Fantastic Four as opposed to Talos. We always expect Skrulls to be in disguise as human characters, but in this case, we might have a comic Skrull within a movie Skrull. Skrullception! And let's talk a little bit more about Super Skrull's history of imitating Carol Danvers. One of the great unanswered questions of the MCU is currently, what happened to Nick Fury's eye? Well, the one that's missing at least. The other one seems to be doing just fine. Looking at a young Nick Fury from the Captain Marvel movie, he clearly has both of them, which makes us think he must lose one at some point in that film. In Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Fury told Steve Rogers that the last time he trusted someone, he lost an eye. Of course, this led to a million fan theories, including one that says Carol Danvers' cat actually clawed the dang thing out. This makes a little more sense when you consider that her cat is really an alien in the comics, but it still seems unlikely. After all, everyone knows you can never really trust a cat. It would make more sense if Fury was injured by a Skrull pretending to be Carol Danvers, who he presumably trusts. That could explain why Fury hasn't contacted her in so long, despite working so hard to put together a team of superheroes. It could be possible he only reached out at the end of Avengers Infinity War because he was desperate in light of the decimation. Not only might Super Skrull be up to his old tricks of imitating Carol Danvers, but he might do some serious damage to Nick Fury. And then we have the idea that Super Skrull will make an appearance during Avengers Endgame. One popular fan theory seems to be that Clint Barton's secretly a Skrull. The idea is that he's gone from Hawkeye to Ronin because he's been replaced by an evil alien shapeshifter. Well, we'll say that the silver lining to Thanos wiping out half of all life in the universe is that there are less possible Skrulls around. What can we say? We're optimists. In the comics, there's a secret invasion storyline where Sleeper Skrull agents don't know they're aliens until it's time to take over the Earth. Clint was Ronin during this time, and while he wasn't a Skrull, he did fight against them. The Skrull are always trying to look for ways to take over the Earth, and having the planet positively decimated does create an opportunity to do so. Apparently, the Skrulls are optimists too, or at least opportunists. Now, let's talk about Thanos, who's someone Super Skrull has actually worked with in the comics. Thanos is not only a threat to the people of Earth, but to the Skrulls as well. It's possible the Skrulls want him gone as much as our heroes do. If they were able to intercept the signal Fury sends to Captain Marvel, maybe it's not really her who shows up. Working with Earth's heroes for a time would have a couple of potential benefits. The first is getting rid of Thanos, which we all know isn't that easy. The second is that doing so would naturally gain the trust of some of the mightiest heroes around. down. This could set up some interesting events for the future of the MCU. We know, we're in the Endgame now, but it's not like they're going to stop making movies after this. Using Endgame as a way to plant the seeds of doubt, discontent, and a serious threat to the human race would be kind of brilliant. After all, if our heroes defeat all evil by the time the credits roll, what'll the next Avengers movie be about? Do you think Super Skrull is ever going to make an appearance in the MCU? If so, do you think it'll be during Captain Marvel, Avengers Endgame, or beyond? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more MCU videos. Thanks for watching.